Hello, and you're very welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan. It is the 6th of July, 2023, and we are joined this week by a very special guest. Keeping an eye on his wife, Mr. Keith Redmond, also known as Mr. Sarah Ryan, is with us. We'll talk to both those wonderful people in a moment, but what we'll be talking about is this is the week when the hate speech bill was put on ice. It is the week when the Minister for Justice decided to put our civil liberties on ice. It is the week when RTE's board and executive directors and all the people there look like they might be going on ice. And it is the week when the Irish economy and public spending was revealed to have heated up to unbelievable degrees. Sarah, how are you? Keith, how are you? Sarah first.
Did you plan that intro? That was very good. All that.
No, I didn't. It came to me.
That was really inspired. I'm fine. I'm good. I'm very happy about the hate speech bill. It feels like a win. I would expect this possibility we'll never hear about it again.
Well, Keith, I wrote a piece last week. I'm not taking credit for this now, but I quoted a senior government TD as saying that delay was becoming a more attractive option. And he said, if it gets delayed, it might never come back. No, I think he's over optimistic. I think there's a lot of people very determined to get something like this passed, and it might come back. But a good week nonetheless. Sorry, Keith, you're not your regular guest. When I raise my voice at the end of a sentence, it's your cue to talk. I'm a really bad communicator, but anyway, we'll try it again.
Yeah,
good week nonetheless.
I'm not as professional as you two at this, so you're just going to have to give me a few more cues. I'm thrilled actually that the hate speech bill has been knocked back until September. I don't share Sarah's optimism. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think it will come back. Now the question is, in what form will it come back? Because I think they will have to do something. They will have to tweak it in some way. And what I'm really hopeful of is that it comes back in a kind of a Dermot Ahern blasphemy bill 2010 kind of way, which is where something is put on the statute book, but it's relatively unenforceable, or certainly weakened to the point where it allows some degree of defense, which obviously the previous bill didn't. So I'm hopeful that we will get some kind of long-term win out of this short-term win, but it is undoubtedly a short-term win. I mean, the government have taken a beating over the last month, and Minister McEntee in particular has taken a beating, and not only from the usual suspects, as they call them, the keyboard warriors, but also senators both with outside her party, but also inside the government. We had Senator Lisa Chambers, and also the Fine Gael senator out here in Fingal. She wasn't me. What's her name? The minister of social protection.
Regina Doherty of the
Regina Doherty. Yeah, my brain has gone blank. So both of those, obviously within the government, were highly critical of the bill. And so when you see that kind of thing happening, you kind of know there's something stirring in the undergrowth, and that's what it turned out to be. So I think it's a win. I think McDowell was fantastic. I think Ronan Mullen was fantastic. Gerald Crockwell, Sharon Keoghan. I mean, they all just kept the pressure on. And I think we get very few wins these days. So we should take this one gratefully.
Yeah, and the hate speech bill has done something unbelievably, almost I would have thought impossible. It's made Ronan Mullen into a TikTok star. I've never seen anything like it. Ronan Mullen, TikTok star. We'll have to get him on the show actually to have a chat about that.
He genuinely gave one of the best speeches in the Seanad in decades in the early part of this a few weeks ago. It was absolutely amazing. If people haven't heard it, they should look it up. It was incredible.
And more importantly, or equally as important, the amount of people who suddenly changed their mind on the abolition of the Seanad because of this. That if the Seanad didn't exist, this would be gone. It'd be done.
Yeah.
And so,
including me,
including you. I mean, I voted to retain the Seanad, but I regretted that vote ever since. And fair is fair. Like McDowell and Ronan Mullen, and Sharon Keoghan, they earned their crust big time.
I always think it's telling though with the Seanad that the most important voices in it are the independents, and I would like to see. I mean, I know they promised reform; it's never going to happen. But I really would like to see a Seanad with more independence in it, and more people elected from, not necessarily from universities. That might be a bit snobby, but like different sectors of society with the proviso that you have to be an independent and can't hold a party affiliation. I think that would be.
John, there's going to be we're going to see huge reform in RTE, so maybe the Seanad will be able to learn from that. Ha ha ha.
We'll come to RTE in a second, but just on the hate speech bill before we finish off, you were talking about Helen McEntee getting criticism. I obviously, in the job that I do for Gript, talk to various politicians on a not for attribution, off the record basis, and I can tell you there's grave discontent with her. Ben actually reported on Gript during the week a conversation with the senior Fine Gael TD in which that was picked up. But I've heard it from people at all levels of the sort of Oireachtas. There's a real sense that she's annoying her own colleagues with a lot of this stuff, and the hate speech bill in particular. I mean, they'll support her in public, but it's a black mark on her copybook. And I don't think I think she's doing her leadership ambitions tremendous damage at the moment.
I think she's basically proving herself to be, since she returned from maternity leave, she's proving herself to be, I think, the most authoritarian Minister for Justice probably since the De Valera and McQuaid era. Like, you know, we're talking about somebody who not only is trying to push through the abolition of free speech, she's also pushing through, as you probably know, the abolition of the freedom of assembly and the freedom of public protest, with regard to her proposed bill to prevent people from even standing outside a hospital that performs an abortion, holding a candle, doing anything at all. I mean, we're not talking about a mob shouting at the hospital. We're talking about the smallest of protests. Even an assembly where people are praying outside a hospital will be forbidden. She's doing that. And then also, which I believe we're going to speak about, she's also gone into the courts this week to negate our constitutional right to privacy with regard to allowing or forcing rather telephone companies to maintain records of every call and text and location that your phone picks up from you for a year. So she is undoubtedly, unquestionably the most authoritarian Minister for Justice we've had in living memory.
In respect to some stuff. I mean, Sarah and I were talking about this last week. I mean, we had a Ukrainian man slashed in Dublin, and we had bikes stolen in broad daylight. We have drug taking. There was a video on one of the Twitter channels this week of people basically fornicating in broad daylight in the middle of Dublin city during the week. Well, I'm leaning into my brand, Sarah.
Riding.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
And Keith is leaning into his.
Exactly. She's not authoritarian about any of that stuff. She's authoritarian about the right of sort of ordinary people to voice their opinions or protest or indeed text their wives, lovers, girlfriends, or friends in privacy. But she's not authoritarian about the stuff that people actually care about, which is having a capital city or indeed any town in the country that's crime free. Doesn't seem to give a shit about that.
No, but she's authoritarian when it comes to civil liberties. I mean, that's without a doubt. She's going to be, she's soft on crime because it's not all that fashionable with the NGOs to be hard on crime.
Yeah. Conor Fitzgerald, who writes a very good Substack, has a thing. He says, you have to understand that the basic disposition of the left in Ireland is pro-crime. And it's very hard to argue with him sometimes. Yeah, but anyway, tell us more about this, because I didn't follow it in any great detail, but tell me exactly what she went into court to do this week.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because no media that I could see, there was one small story in the Irish Times which was very kind of, oh, by the way, this is being done and it's being done, for your benefit. But the media didn't pick up on this in any way whatsoever. Didn't see it on RTE. Didn't hear about it on News Talk. It was extraordinary, really. But effectively, what she did was she went into court and she said, "What I'd like to do, folks, is I want the mobile phone companies to maintain a record of every person in the state's activity on their phone. So activity on your phone, it can be phone calls, it can be text messages, it can be your WhatsApp messages, it can be data, it can be your location, it can be your Google searches, it can be absolutely anything and everything, anything you do on your phone. And that can be retained, that must be retained rather, by the mobile phone companies for the benefit of the state for 1 year." And the reason she gave was national security reasons. Now, she didn't elaborate at all because she knows very well that the courts can't inquire when she says national security reasons. And so it was done deliberately. But you have to imagine this has been done as literally some kind of authoritarian kind of flight of fancy, where she feels, yes, I want that information because I can have it. And she just went in blasé, went into the court, and the court miraculously enough gave it to her, despite the constitutional right to privacy. I think this is something that's ripe for a challenge. But at the same, and you'll remember that they lost a similar. Sarah, I'll defer to Sarah's legal expertise on this, but they lost a similar case against Graham O'Dwyer, the notorious murderer. And he won that case against the government for retaining his mobile phone records, and that was ultimately vindicated in the EU courts as well. So I'm a bit perplexed as to how she's gone into the national courts and done this, but it's just extraordinary that she A, wanted to, B, did it, and C, the courts gave it to her.
Yeah, I mean, I am a bit of a national security hawk, as you probably know, less of a libertarian than you. And when I heard it, I thought to myself, well, maybe somebody in the Gardaí has gone to her and said, look, we think there's a jihadi Islamic State cell operating out of Dublin planning an attack in the UK or something, and we need to keep an eye on them or evidence or gather evidence. I thought maybe that might be the excuse. And then it occurred to me, well, surely they could just go into the court and get warrants for those individuals if they could identify them. The blanket thing makes it a bit dodgy. Yeah, and you're entirely right in your diagnosis, I think, about her approach to civil liberties, where she's very cavalier to it. I wouldn't like to think, bad as things are, that she's just getting this data because she wants it. But Sarah, what do you think?
I mean, I think you can get data for, you know, any kind of is like suspected national security reason. So I mean, I think you can subvert people's rights pretty easily when there's something like that on the table. But I mean, yeah, you'd like to think that she wouldn't be doing that for except for something that was really serious. But to be honest, nothing surprises me anymore, John. Like that, since that hate speech bill was, since the night I read that hate speech bill from start to finish, I thought Ireland has changed and the political classes have changed, and there's an arrogance there and an entitlement and a devil may care attitude to basic human rights and things that are, you know, we think are constitutionally a given that was never there before. So who knows? Probably she fancied having that data.
Yeah. My concern here is that the Gardaí use it for fishing expedition. Because in terms of your right to privacy, I mean, the Gardaí have a right to get a warrant to search your house, right? Do they need a warrant? Do they need a warrant or probable cause to go looking through your phone data?
Yeah, but they're supposed to. I mean, yeah.
I am concerned. I have to say I am concerned because one thing, I'm going to say something very unpopular here. I don't think, this is just my personal opinion, it is not shared by the courts and it is certainly not shared by most of the country. I don't think Graham Dwyer's conviction was sound because they used that data. I mean, I don't care what anyone says now. That data showing where he was on the motorway, that he was texting this the victim, and he was in, you know, on the M50, the M8, wherever he was. That was vital to securing his conviction. Absolutely vital. And it has been established that the state had no right to get that data. Now, obviously, I'm in no doubt as to his guilt. I'm not saying Graham Dwyer is innocent in any way, shape, or form. I believe 100% that he's guilty. But I don't think that was good. I don't think the state should have the right to go poking around in your location data and find out exactly where you were at any time. I agree with Keith. There should be some right to privacy there.
Yeah, anyway. But that's effectively what Helen McEntee has done now. She has decided that it was so successful for Graham Dwyer, and I think this is actually where it's come from. This is the impetus. It was so successful for the Graham Dwyer conviction that even though the EU courts say it's not right, we're going to make sure we have some fig leaf of cover when we do this again, because we really want to do it anyway. And this is what I mean. Her instinct is civil authoritarianism. She genuinely just has this instinct in her. And I think it was probably suggested to her by some manager in the Department of Justice, look, if you want to do this again, you're going to need to get some kind of court approval. And she said, we'll just go in on the QT there while RTE is basically imploding. Let's go in on the QT and get this done. So I think that's effectively what's gone on here. It's a power grab from a minister who is, by her nature, just a civil authoritarian.
Yeah, the RTE wouldn't have covered it anyway, even if they weren't imploding. I mean, you're right in that the media coverage it's gotten has been basically non-existent. And you would have thought that there would be like some kind of wave of authoritarian media coverage saying this is a really good idea, because that's what normally happens. But it's one of these things that's just whistled under the radar, and we'll find out about it. And obviously the nature of these things as well is that they tend to be, unfortunately, quite popular, because you say Graham Dwyer's name, and I think a lot of people in the country would go, yeah, well, sure, you've nothing to hide. What does it matter? That attitude does tend to be pervasive. But wait until the crimes change. Wait until I don't want to sound like Gemma O'Doherty, but wait until the hate speech bill passes in some form, and they're going through your phone to see if you ever used a bad word of a travelers in a joke to your mates. Because that data will be retained as well. And they do have the right under the hate speech bill, which has been shelved, not abolished, to access your phones and your data to see if you have anything hateful in your possession, including, I presume, your text messages. Sarah, I can feel you're buzzing to talk about RTE.
Yeah, I mean, do you own any Havaiana flip-flops, John?
I don't, but I worked out that they're 25 quid each, so those must be some pretty good flip-flops. When I was in America, I got a pair with the Republican Party logo on them that say 2 right feet. They're really naff, but they're the only flip-flops I own.
Oh my God, they sound amazing. I want them. No, I think it is a huge mess. That's what I think. I think that the carry on and the spending is shocking, and I didn't even think I could be that shocked, but I am shocked. I think they, like I said last week, and I stand over it even more so, that they treat the public with contempt, that this slush fund is treating the public with contempt. And I think that, we should, like the Gript should, whenever writing an article about anything, should stop saying euros, like 200 pairs of Havaiana flip-flops for 4,700. We should just use license fees. So they spent 462 people's license fees on flip-flops and 322 people's license fees on a meeting that got cancelled, and 27,000 households license fees on the Toy Story musical that never went anywhere, etc., etc. Because the money is like monopoly money. It's not real, but we need to remind people all the time that these are piles of 160 euros that people paid, or under threat of going to jail for this nonsense.
And I mean, I'm struck by the weakness of some of the stuff. I mean, Eamon Ryan out today blathering on about how RTE is absolutely essential and must be saved, because they're now worried. You can actually sense the shift in government from we're going to get votes from bashing RTE for their scandals to now, maybe RTE are in such trouble that we have to move into a sort of defense mode. So we had 2 Green ministers today, Catherine Martin and Eamon Ryan, so, starting to defend RTE's important role as a public service broadcaster, because they're actually now worried that this stuff has gone so far that the public are just like, shut it down. I don't know if people are at that point yet, but you can feel the mood music starting to turn. I mean, when Marty Morrissey turns into a national villain, as he did today when he revealed that he confirmed something that we heard during the week, Sarah, actually. I think a lot of people have heard the rumor that it was Marty Morrissey who had borrowed a Renault car for 5 years. It's a long length of a car. That there's just something fundamental. There's a culture problem in RTE. I have actually a piece coming out tomorrow saying if you're going to fix it, you're not going to abolish it, everyone needs to be fired, because it's cultural. I mean, these people are promoted from middle ranks up to senior ranks, and this is the way it's been done. This is the way it's always been done. I mean, the barter accounts, the Holy Trinity, the 3 in 1, they existed under a series of chief financial officers. There was no impetus to shut them down, because that's the way it's always been done. The culture in there is completely rotten. And I think if you leave anyone in there running the thing who's been brought up in that culture for the last 20 odd years, the changes they'll want to make are minimal. It's human nature. You need a completely new broom at minimum, but I still say shut it down, sell it off, build apartments in Donnybrook, and move sort of a national news broadcaster to Athlone or somewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder, the culture of RTE was exemplified by those Havaiana flip-flops. As you say, they're 25 quid a pop, right? So let's say you need to buy, what is that? They bought 200 pairs of them for this $5,000, right? So if you need to buy 200 pairs of flip-flops for some event, something, I don't know, God knows what it is, right? the first instinct of somebody who's been told to buy 200 pairs of flip-flops for some PR event is not to buy Havaiana flip-flops.
Yeah, listen, Keith, sorry to interrupt you, right? But how many weddings have you been to? Well, I'm obviously the only woman here. A lot of 80% of weddings that you go into the ladies' toilets and the bride has bought a basket of flip-flops so that women can take their shoes off and dance. And I know for a fact that those flip-flops, you can get them on multiple websites or whatever, and they cost about 50 cents each.
Yeah, I just had a quick look. I had a quick look on AliExpress there, and you can get a pair of flip-flops for €1.10. So if you can get a pair of flip-flops for €1.10, and as you say, Sarah, we've seen many times flip-flops provided for free for wedding guests and stuff like that. Like, that's the instinct that a person who's spending their own money has when they're buying flip-flops. If you are spending other people's money, and it comes down to this famous Milton Friedman, example of when you're spending other people's money, you're not half as careful as when you're spending your own, obviously. And RTE are the living exemplification of that, because everything has to be the best of the best, even if it's for a one night only ridiculousness, like whatever PR event they were doing with flip-flops. But when you get to but as you say, it's an embedded culture, John. And when you're saying you need to fire everybody and start again, first of all, the new Director General, Kevin Bakehurst, is a former Deputy Director General. So he is embedded in this culture. He knows this culture. So he's the former Deputy Director General, and he's going to be the new broom that's going to clear the way and for this shiny new RTE. Like, give me a break. Like, they turned down that guy, the CEO of An Post, McRedmond, David because quote, he was too entrepreneurial. Now, can you believe that? That was the reason that was given. He was too entrepreneurial in his interviews. So when he was in his interviews, they were shocked by his entrepreneurialism so much that they had to get rid of him. So if anybody was going to be the new broom, it was going to be him. But the former Deputy Director General taking over now is not in any way a change of culture. Let's be brutally honest here, okay? And the other thing to bear in mind about the culture there is that, as you say, the politicians are now beginning to panic a little, that they've overcooked this and the public are turning against them. And so the two Green ministers were out, but also the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach were out today defending the TV license and saying you should pay your TV license, because they sense the possibility of a water charges moment where we have a mass non-pay of TV licenses. And if there was a mass non-pay of TV licenses in the same way as there was for the water charges, the TV license could very well be doomed here. The amount of money that's been squandered by RTE, and as Sarah said, the amount of people's TV license fees that have been squandered could easily be packaged into a popular movement and result in mass non-payment. And I think the politicians are beginning to panic a wee bit about that. And rightfully so.
But are also, like, let's call a spade, like, are you not, to play devil's advocate here, are you not a gobshite to pay it from now on? Unless you see a massive overhaul of the whole thing. Are you not a gobshite if you pay that fee at this point? Like, they're coming out today because they're starting to realise that, the shock and awe, as you say in the beginning, everyone clutched their pearls or whatever, and it was like, this is terrible. But now they're realising that the public are outraged, and they're starting to, like, I saw, and two of them said, it's important for us to have balanced media. You must be joking. Does anybody actually, do they think that the public really believe for 1 second that RTE provides balanced news? Are they out of their minds? Was RTE balanced during COVID?
Catherine Martin cited COVID today. I don't know if you saw this there. Catherine Martin, when Ben asked her about why, she said something like, it's very important, we need public service broadcasting. And Ben just said, why? Why do we need it? And she was like, well, we saw why during COVID when RTE provided fair, independent, factual and balanced news. And I mean, I didn't fall off my chair laughing. I just kind of, because
okay, fine, but COVID, was RTE balanced during the referendum on the 8th? Like, you must be out of your mind if you think that RTE isn't I think RTE is more biased than the others. Like, they have their own agenda, they have their opinions on things, and their entire news and their entire editorial line is driven by that agenda on everything.
Well-
They ask us to pay to be told what to think. Like, they are so biased, it's pathetic. And that two government ministers would have summon up all of the audacity in their bodies to say that we need balanced media. You must be joking. Like, you must be joking.
I think RTE are basically the left-wing version of Fox News. They are so egregiously biased. It's hilarious that anybody, including a government minister or anybody else, would stand up and say that they're anything like fair and balanced. In COVID, they effectively parroted the government line and questioned nothing. Not the 90-minute staying in a pub, not eating a meal, because COVID only gets you if you're hungry. Like, they questioned nothing. They parroted the government line, and Claire Byrne, as she was called, Claire Byrne, basically wanted more restrictions, heavier restrictions. I mean, that RTE were anything other than a cheerleader for more and more restrictions during COVID is undoubted. And seeing Catherine Martin coming out today saying that was the example of why we need public service broadcasting made me realize that was the reason we don't need RTE.
Well, there's another factor here as well. And sorry not to be echoing and pile on, but I'm going to pile on. Because the other issue is that the Green Party have a particular vested interest. Because RTE is the only broadcaster in the state that is signed up to an international organization called Covering Climate Now, which basically mandates what you might call the alarmist position on climate change to be the only position that the broadcaster takes. You are completely banned from appearing on RTE program to take any position on climate change other than if we don't radically change the world is going to burn. That is RTE policy. You can't go on. In addition, the broadcaster has been given by Catherine Martin's own department, I think in the region of €4 million over the last 2 years to make programs promoting the Green Party's view of the climate. The Green Party in particular use RTE as a messaging vehicle for them politically, and they have
and as a result of signing up to that agreement, they will proudly say that they do not offer what they call both-sidism when it comes to climate change. So they will not allow an alternative view to even be expressed on the airwaves. Mm-hmm. So it's a bold admission by an agency that pretends to stand up for the pillars of journalism to say that we are basically taking one line, it's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and we're accepting nothing else. So you're right. I mean, they scratched the Green Party's back, and the Green Party are now scratching theirs. And unfortunately, the Green Party are in charge of the ministry that is most engaged with this, obviously communications. So, like, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this is going to be that classic Irish scandal that Jason O'Mahony writes about, which is where everybody gets up in arms, we have a hearing, it all goes into the long woods, and then we just forget about it. And that's basically what's going to happen here. Although, wouldn't it be wonderful if we saw old Leo Varadkar? Do you remember old Leo Varadkar used to come out, shoot from the hip, and come out with some kind of bold thing that no one else would say?
I remember that guy.
And he was great. I liked him. He was great.
Can I just interject here? Because I wrote in a piece about a week or so ago that I knew him a little bit when I was younger. I think did you know him as well, Keith, back in the day before he goes to the like can we just put on the record here that the right wing Leo Varadkar thing wasn't a myth? I mean, he made you and me look like kind of like wusses.
Leo Varadkar, people forget, was not only pro-life, staunchly pro-life. He was against gay marriage. And he was against gay adoption, and he was against gay men giving blood at the National Transfusion Service. Like, this is a guy who made me raise my eyebrows. Like, this is a guy who was super right wing, and now he's basically Justin Trudeau with fancier socks. Like, he's become so center left, social liberal. It's stunning. He used to actually slag off, I don't know if you remember this, he used to slag off Gareth Fitzgerald's tenure as Taoiseach and stood up in the Dáil and pointed at Brian Cowan when Brian Cowan was at his lowest ebb and shouted at him and said, like, you'll end up like Gareth Fitzgerald, writing articles in the Irish Times no one reads, and just people thinking back on your tenure as someone who ruined the country economically and was only concerned about social issues, blah, blah. Mate, what are you talking about? He may as well have been shouting in the mirror. I mean, he's turned into Garrett Fitzgerald's, stepson. I mean, it's extraordinary, the transformation in this guy. But imagine he was to get up in the morning and decide, you know what I'm going to do here? I'm gonna do something that I think will be extremely popular, but at the same time won't matter a shite when it comes to the finances. And that is, if he said, I'm going to abolish the TV license, right? The people would be thrilled, all right? Mm-hmm. And you would say, oh my God, that sounds like a reckless move. The TV license brings in €160 million a year, okay? And let me tell you, for the guys who are currently in government, I know we're moving on to this, the guys who are currently in government, €160 million is a sniff. It's nothing. We're spending $3.5 billion on housing Ukrainians and people fleeing persecution, etc. $3 billion a year is being spent on that alone. So I'm sure they could scrounge up 160 million to cover that, and all they would have to do, and they would basically say, we're abolishing the TV license as a result of this scandal, blah blah blah. Leo would get huge kudos for that, and old Leo would have done that.
He would have done it long before this scandal.
Imagine if that happened next week. It'd be like the hate crime bill kicked to touch this week. Next week, the abolition of the TV license. What next?
Oh, I don't know.
They might actually cut taxes. Imagine that.
No, that would be the most exciting 3 weeks of our lives. That the government finally listened to the public. It'd be like some kind of. The lizard people
being really dragged kicking and screaming into all these positions. Remember, it's not as if Leo has suddenly rediscovered his roots. I mean, Ben Scallon asked him a question today about the Tusla scandal, which we won't talk about in any great depth. But like, basically, there's a report out there saying that there are girls in the care of Tusla being trafficked for sex, and Leo just maybe frowned and stomped up in a "how dare you ask me about that? Yes, it's being investigated, but I won't give you any more details" kind of way. The government are being dragged kicking and screaming into all of these positions with really bad grace. And I mean, wouldn't it be so refreshing if he they're slumped in the polls, they're at 19%, because no one cares about anything he says. Say some interesting things, Leo. Stand up and say, you know what? RTE have been a disgrace for a long time, and it's time for serious reform. We're abolishing the TV license, as Keith said. Tusla have been a disgrace. We are reforming that because the allegations are being made are deeply concerning.
Yeah, we've heard what you said about the hate. We've heard what you said about the hate speech bill, so we're going to reconsider it and discuss it again in a few months' time. But it's not going to happen in its current iteration, etc., etc. I reckon that Fine Gael would literally go up about 10 points if they did all this stuff.
Yeah. I think if they did that, they would actually be touching base with who they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah.
Fine Gael have lost poll numbers because they've lost their way. They don't realize who they're supposed to be for anymore. They're basically the sock Dems, with a couple of farmers. I mean, that's basically what they are now.
I'm going to remind listeners who don't know that Keith served with great honor and distinction, and to the annoyance of many people of the left in Fingal, as a councillor for Fine Gael. So he's not just a crank. You're somebody who was actually representative of that party, so you know of which you speak.
I'm not just a crank, but I am a crank. But it's it's true. I mean, when I joined Fine Gael, it was after the crash, and the thinking was these guys were going to be the new fiscal, kind of the new broom, and fiscally they were going to take care of things where these cowboys in Fianna Fáil had collapsed the country, blah de blah, and then Fine Gael were going to come in. And meanwhile, narrator says, meanwhile, 10 years later, and we'll talk about it now soon, they've completely lost their minds. They are like drunken sailors spending money at the moment now. They put Fianna Fáil in 2007 to shame.
Here's what Fine Gael said in the 2011 election manifesto. It's worth reading this, actually. Quote, this is directly from Fine Gael 2011 election manifesto. Behind the wreckage of our banking system, health service, public finances, and the jobs market lies a cozy culture of cronyism and low standards that has infiltrated the top of our political and public service systems under recent governments. It is a culture that abandoned the principles underlining the republic founded by Fine Gael, blah, 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 that allowed the state to be run for the benefit of the few, not the many. It allowed special interests to crowd out the public interest, and it pushed the interests of citizens behind those of powerful elites. 12 years they've been in office. 12 long fecking, and I don't mean fecking, I mean the other word, 12 years they've been in office after they said that. And I mean, the animals looked from pig to man and back to pig again, and they could not tell the difference. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
I mean,
Totally.
anyway, on that, let's talk a little bit about the public finances. Keith, take it away, because you probably do this better than me.
Yeah, you're the one who's the most furious.
Well, I put a tweet out there the other day about this, and it's something that when the numbers were sent to me, they were actually sent to me by a former TD, and he said to me, I'm not going to put this up. He said, but you're mad enough to do it, so put this up for me. And I said, fine. So in 2019, the state's budget was 77 billion euro, right? That was in 2019. Now, I want you to bear in mind, about 5 years previous, it was about 40 billion, right? So it had been a serious jump in 5 or 6 years to 77 billion euro, right? And it's very hard sometimes to get your head around numbers like billions, but 77,000 million. Okay, so imagine winning £1 million in the lotto. Now imagine winning it 77,000 times, right? That was the budget in 2019. And now we're 4 years, it'll be 5 years. 5 years later again, right? So the proposed budget for next year, for 2024, has just been announced. And it's 107 billion euro. So 30 billion euro more than it was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's
it's not far off a 50% increase.
No, exactly. As I was going to say, it's just shy. I think it's just shy of 40%, right? But I mean, it doesn't really matter that you and I can't work it out, because no one else seems to be able to work the damn thing out either, right? So you're talking about 107 billion euro, okay, being spent by a country the size of Ireland. It's absolutely fascinating. 5 million people in the country. So those kind of jumps in public spending, people will say, well, sure, isn't it marvelous that we've got all this money to spend now on improving the country, right? Now, meanwhile, last year, okay, it was 97 billion, right? So we've gone from 77 to 97, 20 billion in those years. Now, can anybody honestly tell me that they have noticed a significant change for that 20 billion euro per year, by the way, not in total, per year? And I'm not talking about COVID. COVID was exceptional times, blah. We're not talking about COVID. We're now after COVID. 2023, the year we're living in now, is after COVID, and we're spending 20 billion more. We're going to spend another, 10 billion next year. So this is nothing to do with COVID. Okay. Where did that money go? Do we have a health service that's 40% better? Do we have an education system that's 40% better? Do we have a transport system that's 40% better? No, we don't. So
how dare you, Keith? We have about 500% more of those annoying bollards on the road carving up all the streets, and we have about 500% more random signage all over the city centre. You have to walk through a wave of piss to see the sign, but we definitely have more signs. So how dare you? There's definitely been €1 billion. €1 billion at least has been spent on road signage and nonsense bollards. So just rein it in.
Just on that note, sorry, Keith. Just on that note that Sarah mentions, just as it's a complete aside, but years ago, a Fianna Fáil politician said to me, and I'd kind of forgotten it until just now. He said, if you want to find where there's some kind of dodgy dealing going on in the country, my hint is look at who's getting all the contracts for the signage. Now, I have no idea whether that's true or whether it's not true, but we seem to spend an awful lot of money on signage. An immense amount of money on signage compared to I was in other countries. I was in 2 other European countries this last month, and they don't have half as many signs. We have signs everywhere for everything, and they're ugly as hell. But anyway,
good point.
I don't know where.
Go into your local signage company, and if everybody is wearing Havianas, you know that it's time to sniff around more.
It'll be like that scene in Father's Head, where he goes into the pub and the lads are wearing the furs and the crown. Yeah, that'll be like if you went to the local signage company. Anyway. To all signage companies that may have been named, I was not referring to you anyway.
But getting back to the fact that we're going to go to hell in a handbasket, there's all this extra money, these billions and billions of euro, right, are all being effectively funded by a boom in corporation tax. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have just as a result of global economic reasons, we're obviously the center for pharma and tech companies, and we're getting a boom from that. Fantastic, and we're getting these corporation tax receipts. They are very reminiscent of the stamp duty and capital taxes that we were getting during the property boom.
Mhm.
Very reminiscent of it. A windfall tax that can blow with the wind, blow in and blow out. And that's exactly what this is again. We've literally learned nothing from the last crash. We've learned nothing. And we are, mark these words, we are destined for a crash again, because that is the nature of capitalist markets. They go up and they go down. And when this market goes down, when the tide goes out, or when the wind changes, we are going to have a massive program of austerity again. And potentially our old friends, Mr. Joshi from the IMF, could very well be in telling us that we're bold boys and girls and we have to do things differently again, because we simply are incapable of learning.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's a reason lessons will be learned is a cliche in this country, right? And it's only a cliche because lessons are never bloody well learned. Never. Lessons have been learned. I mean, I think back to that time in the crash there. Do you remember when, in the aftermath, remember Enda Kenny and Pat Rabbitt promising sober government and never again, and we will run the country prudently and live within our means. And then we had the fiscal treaty in 2011, which is a complete failure in Ireland's case, because it's actually very well designed in one respect, in that it means that you can only increase your spending so long as it doesn't go above a certain percentage of your national debt, or the deficit has to be a certain percent of GDP. But when you have this tax boom, the fiscal treaty isn't operable. There's no regulation saying, in Charlie McCreevy's words, you can't spend what you have. And because we have all this money now, we're just splurging it everywhere. I mean, I did a piece this week about how the HSE is ordering a new 20-bed segment in University Hospital Limerick for 50 million over 5 years, right? So these beds are costing about 1,400 quid a bed, which is about 800 quid a bed more than what Simon Harrison, as Minister for Health, said they should cost. And at the end of 5 years, they won't belong to the HSE. We're basically funding out of public money the construction of a new private semi-hospital in Limerick, which can then go and take its services elsewhere. The spending of public money and the way it's being spent is just absolutely extraordinary. And no one cares.
It's also coupled with seemingly an absolute allergy to giving any of the public the money back. Yes. In the form of tax cuts. Like, there was an idea floated a few weeks ago, about the potential for some tax cuts, and they all ran away from it within days. But do you know what it is? I think it's like that. There's still a disconnect, and it's probably, in large part, certainly from political sides, done on purpose. There's a disconnect in the language between, like, government spending and your money. Do you know what I mean? Like, that people don't think as much about government spending as the money that they're paying in tax, and therefore it becomes easier and easier not to propose tax cuts. Like, we're talking about massive surpluses. We're talking about money flooding into a supposed rainy day fund. But on the other hand, we're talking about a lot of people, especially this winter, like, we're obviously into the summer now, but who really struggled with bills and who are struggling. Mm-hmm. And, who will struggle even more, if Keith is right, if there's, like a recession, austerity, whatever. And they never, ever, ever talk. There is no party in government, in Leinster House, that talks about tax cuts, that talks about that makes proposals for tax cuts, that makes proposals for giving people more of their money back. Nobody. It's just spend. Like we talk about the analogy all the time, that the structure of this government is like your divorced parents, and daddy wants you to like him more, so he promises to bring you to Disney World, and mommy wants you to like her more, so she promises to buy you a moped. But both of them, but you end up spoiled and whatever, but you also don't get any love, you don't get what you need. And really, why don't they just, like, if we have this much money, tax cuts, nobody talks about it.
Yep. I mean, the other thing that strikes me here, and I endorse everything you said, Sarah, is the degree to which this, like, politicians don't even seem to me to have a sense of what they're doing. I mean, I mentioned these figures. No, I'm deadly serious. I mentioned the figures that Keith mentions, the massive increases of spending to a government TD. I won't say any more than that because I'll identify him if I say a single word more than that, but a government TD. And he said, I got a text back. The text had one word: Jesus. I mean, he didn't know what his own government was spending or the scale of the increase. I mean, what are these? I mean, I'm sorry if you're listening. I mean, I know you're a well-intentioned public servant, but, like, what you didn't know. You didn't know what your own government was spending. I really have a sense sometimes that the country is not being. We've talked about this, Sarah. That the country isn't being run by any one leader at all, and that a lot of our elected politicians, like something we don't talk about is the morale on the government benches is in the toilet. It is in the toilet. These people, like, they don't like their own government. Particularly in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they don't like it. They're not enthused by it. They're getting the ears worn off them at every clinic over everything from crime to killing cows to the turf ban in rural areas to this RTE stuff. They don't like it. It's not a pleasant experience, and lots of them are retiring at the next election. The morale is in the toilet, and a lot of them don't even know what's happening. And I wonder whether that doesn't extend to some of the cabinet as well. I wonder.
But John,
I wonder if you polled every cabinet minister and asked them how much has spending increased in the last 4 years. I wonder how. I genuinely, hand on heart, wonder how many of them would know.
But I would have had, like, not to go back to the hate speech bill, but just on the subject, like, I would have had more sympathy for that. But it was really obvious to me that when, like, the TDs in government voted for that bill. They voted for it. And then when they started to feel the heat and they started to feel the pressure and the senators started to speak up about it, then some of them started coming out. And no one really, I haven't really seen many people address this, but why are you coming out now and saying, oh, in hindsight, this isn't a good bill? Did you read it? I was struck
this week by Jim O'Callaghan. Now, I know you, by the way, I've time for Jim O'Callaghan. Well, he's coordinating the opposition within Fianna Fáil to the hate speech bill. That was reported in one of the Sunday newspapers. I can't remember which one. Jim O'Callaghan coordinating the opposition. He voted for it. He voted for it a couple of weeks ago. Now he's coordinating the opposition. I mean, come on, Jim.
Like, do they really think that they're fooling anybody with that? Like, it makes you wonder, do they really think so little of the general public that they think that they're such idiots that they'll swallow that? I mean, every single Fianna Fáil TD voted for the hate speech bill. Every single Fine Gael TD voted for the hate speech bill. So, there's no point in coming out now and saying that, oh, Jesus, we're on reflection and we're setting up a gang and we're all going to, like, it's a posse and we're going out. Nobody believes you. If you're listening to me now, like, and you're kind of thinking, your man doesn't understand. Nobody believes you. So just literally don't say anything, because, every word you say just makes you look like a bigger idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can be as disillusioned as you like. And you're right, John, that, like, back to the point, like, morale is low and all of that. But you know what? Like, read the stuff, read the bill, listen to the public. Use the hate bill. The hate speech bill should be a wake up call for anybody who's in Leinster House, who's a TD right now, who's maybe a bit disillusioned that you're totally out of touch with what the public are thinking and saying and feeling, and you need to get back out and immerse yourself in the public a bit more. You've gotten lost in the bubble of Leinster House, because if you voted for that and thought, yeah, that's grand, voted it right through, and now you're all up in arms about it because you've gotten 5,000 emails from an irate public about it. Well, you need to have a word with yourself and what you're doing.
Well, between that and RTE and everything else we discussed this week, it's not been a banner week for the people running the country, but when's the last time they had a good week? I can't remember the last time the people running the country had a good week where you kind of felt that the country had taken a step in the right direction. It feels to me,
but it was a good week. It was a good week for people power, John. It was a good week for the public.
Yeah.
Because the hate speech bill, like, the public rose up against that. And, okay, we'll see what happens in a couple of months. But for now, it's kicked a touch. And Helen McEntee is going to do her best to not be humiliated there, and they're going to try and do something. But ultimately, it's a loss for them. The RTE thing is a loss for the government. They're now having to sort of, like, it's important for democracy. Yeah, sure. But, like, they're on the back foot. So I think it's a good week for the public. It's a good week. The public are starting, I've said there's been a sea change for a while. Public are starting to not care about being called transphobe. They're asking questions about that issue. They're asking more questions about immigration. They're asking questions about loads of things. And there's a sea change happening. And I think it's good. The government haven't had a good week in a while, but they don't deserve a good week. And they haven't deserved a good week in a long, long time.
And, like, if you were in any way of an intuitive politician, as we thought Leo was, you would think he would sit there tonight and go, right, the public want X, Y, and Z from these issues. I'm going to throw them a bit of meat here. And that's the moment where you step outside the political fray and you actually offer the public a kind of a glimpse of an alternative way of looking at things. Because at the moment, it's so homogenous, both government and opposition on all of these issues, that, as Sarah says, the public have literally rose up against not just the government, the entire political class.
Mhm.
The entire political class. And they have said, no, we're not having this. No, we're not happy with that. No, right? And we're irate about the RTE. Like, if you were Leo sitting there, there's so many easy wins here to pick off the tree. And I know he's an avid listener to this podcast. And so I would suggest to you, Leo, as you sit there now, swirling your cranberry juice in your glass in your evening meal, and you just think to yourself now, what would old Leo do?
You'd write a very mean letter to the Irish Times. That's what he'd do. He used to be an avid letter writer at the Irish Times. I just think, I look, when I see Leo Varadkar, I've resisted making this point on this podcast before, but I think it's important enough to make. I think he is more loyal or more concerned about what his circle of friends think than he is about what the opinion polls say. That's my impression of him. I think that Leo Varadkar is more concerned about the disapproval of his personal social circle, which is very liberal and very progressive and all the rest of it, than he is about what the polls say. And I think he's deeply embarrassed about his right-wing past. Deeply embarrassed. Ashamed that he was.
Well, I mean, governments in general, if they're there too long, they end up in bubbles and they don't really, they lose touch with the public. And there's no greater bubble than this one. I mean, we have a Leinster House has departed. I mean, it's not a bubble, it's a UFO, and it's just departed and left the rest of us here. I mean, it's running its own show inside in there. I mean, nobody knows what the hell's going on. Outside, we don't know what the hell's going on in there. Like, it doesn't make sense to anybody.
Somebody made that exact point to me during the week with using a memorable phrase. When somebody was saying that Leinster House is sort of a bubble and they're all in there, and they said, you know that because it's the only place in Ireland where Ivana Bacik is taken seriously. Which is true. It's true.
Yeah, the Bacik bomb hasn't really been a stellar moment for Labour, has it? Like, the Bacik bomb is just absolutely. I mean, it's incredible. You would have thought that Labour could go no lower, but no, it turns out you can. I will find it very funny. I was looking the other day. I mean, Brendan Howlin might retire. There's no certainty on that. And if he does, then it is eminently possible, on the figures from last weekend where Labour were on 2%, that the only Labour TD to be re-elected at the next election might be Alan Kelly.
AK-47.
He got a personal vote in Tipperary. I actually live in Alan Kelly's backyard in his bailiwick, and he gets a vote here that is not a Labour Party vote. He gets an Alan Kelly is a sound lad who sorts out the local issues and is a really good local TD. That's the vote he gets, and I think he'll keep a lot of it. And
the thing is, can I just say though, like, all jokes aside, and I'm, think I've mentioned before, like, not a Labour voter, but I think that's really bad. Like, I think that there is some smart people in Labour. I think they're wrong on absolutely everything they think and say, but, like, Duncan Smith is he's a good TD. Like, he's a local TD for us here. He's a good TD. He's a smart guy. Again, I think he's wrong. I think he's wrong. And a very nice person. I think he's wrong in every single thing he says or thinks, but he still brings something to the table, and he has an ideology, and he's smart. And, like, if Labour sitting TDs right now have any sense at all, like, stop sitting there waiting for the thing to fall on your head and do something. It hasn't worked out. It was a huge mistake to get rid of Alan Kelly. A huge mistake.
Massive.
And Ivana Bacik has not landed with the public. I said it a few weeks ago on the podcast. They've done everything. They've tried everything. It's embarrassing at this point. It's like, kind of throwing out anything. We'll build 1 million homes. What? 2 million? Oh, well, this one. No one cares. Labour need a couple of big ideas and a better leader. I'm sorry. It just hasn't worked out. And if they want to save their seats, like, I don't think it's good for politics necessarily for any party to be wiped out completely. And I think they should face the fact that they made a huge mistake and do something about it, or they're going to be gone.
Yeah,
Like,
but
Well,
annihilated.
I think Alan Kelly could very well be the only sitting Labour TD that's elected at the next election. But I wonder if he'll be running for Labour, because
Yeah,
I
heard that too.
like Michael O'Leary, not Ryanair Michael O'Leary, but Michael O'Leary used to be Labour leader in the 80s. He eventually ended up as a Fine Gael TD. And, I wouldn't be surprised if the unloved Alan Kelly eventually just decided, well, if you don't want me and you're a sinking ship anyway, I'll hop off somewhere else. And could easily end up running for one of the two big parties.
Yeah.
Big
And
parties.
also, they'd be lucky to have him, because he's actually a really good TD. He does his Uber Wally on things. When he gets into an issue, he gets his teeth into it. He's a really good researcher. He's a good parliamentarian. They'd be lucky to have him. That's why it was a huge mistake to get rid of him, because he has broad appeal. He's rural and city. Like, he's not, you know what I mean? He appeals to all different kinds of people. Again, wrong and everything, but still a good politician. It was a massive mistake. Labour got mad horny with the taste of winning at that by-election and decided they remembered what it felt like to win so they haven't won a thing since 2011, and they thought, oh, we're another Gael, let's jump on another Gael, we've got the win behind us, and we know how the last one worked out. So it was dumb, but call it what it is, a mistake, and do something about it, or else you will be annihilated.
We're basically out of time, but I'll sum up what I think the problem is, right? I think the problem, not just for Labour, but for all these parties, is that none of them are making anything happen. They're all sitting there, and this strikes me every time I talk to a TD, which I do fairly, not that often, because I think it's important not to talk to them too much, because honestly, you get sucked into
you might catch something.
But none of them make anything happen. They're sitting there waiting for the political wind to blow and hope that it blows in their direction. And I get this sense with the Labour Party that they believe the public will come to their senses. That, that they're sort of, that they will come to their senses and vote for Labour because that's what you do, because that's, and the same with Fine Gael and the same with Fianna Fáil, that all these issues, hate speech, immigration, chicks with dicks, whatever you want to say, it's all the public will eventually come to their senses. They're just having a little tiff with us. But,
they'll knock on the door of some old lady who can't afford to heat her home, and they'll say, you seem to be in a spot of bother there, you're freezing, but you know what'll warm you up? We tried to get To Kill a Mockingbird removed from the school syllabus, and that just must warm your soul, mustn't it? Jesus. Yeah. I mean, they're completely absurd. The joke of a party.
They have an Irish Times narcissism that, we're the paper of record. We actually know all of these things. All these silly little other people don't understand. Come to us. We will tell you the truth. We will give you our wisdom. The Fintan O'Toole school of narcissism. And so this is what Labour are. Labour are basically the party of the Irish Times. And they're the political wing of the Irish Times. And
you've managed to talk about Labour without even mentioning your favourite Labourite, Aon.
Oh, don't talk to me about him.
Okay.
Honestly, Jesus Christ, the most disingenuous politician to have ever darkened the door of the Dáil. I need a whole podcast about him.
We will do it. Perhaps we'll do a whole podcast about housing in Clontarf. That will be an interesting discussion. But for now, I'm afraid, folks, as much fun as this has been, I think we've gone over an hour. So, people, if you're still listening, thanks for sticking with us. And if you're still listening, that shows you're kind of feeling the way we're feeling. And I think a lot of people are. I always say to people when I'm talking to them, the biggest thing that happens in this current situation is that people have this sense of isolation, because they feel this way, but they don't hear other people talking this way. So if you are out there and you're looking at the country and you're going, what in the name of jeepers is going on? You're not on your own. And to remind you of that, we'll be back this time next week with another edition of The Week That Really Was. But for now, from Sarah, from Keith, and from me, thank you and have a great weekend.